Hi, I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Welcome to Single Shot at Roundtable at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Today we will be talking about architectural photography, and our distinguished guest today, Richard Berenholtz, spent several decades photographing New York from architectural point of view, and have a lot to share about the subject. Hello, Richard. Thank you so much. I'm honored to finally personally meet you.
Thank you.
I was following your work online, and it's really interesting how your commercial photography complemented your recent work. But just to start, as I understand, you had architectural background before you actually started to photograph buildings.
Yes, I got my undergraduate degree actually in civil engineering, and then I got my master's in architecture, and I worked in architecture for 10 years, about half of which time I worked for IMPay and Partners. And I love being an architect, but through a series of unexpected events, unplanned, I wound up switching to photography around 1984.
It's actually quite a big switch. So how did it happen? How somebody with a career already established, existing for decades, and who probably have quite a few buildings to point out in the area about which he can say, I build them, decided that he actually more interested in documenting them than to actually continuing to build new ones?
Well, as I said, it wasn't really planned. I didn't own a camera until I got into architecture school, because I felt I might need to photograph buildings. So it became a hobby, and while it was a hobby, while I was an architect, I had 3 one-man shows in New York of my work, which I only did black and white at the time. And after 10 years in the profession, I happened to be between jobs. A friend of mine who was a creative director at a big ad agency needed somebody to go around the country and photograph hotels for her. And she said, do you want to do this? So that was the start of it. And
so it actually started with a commission gig.
It started with a commission gig.
Rare situation.
Right. So, and it was a lot. It was like I wasn't working. I was playing. You know, I was having a great time. Everything was like first class, and we flew first class, and we stayed at the best hotels. And I also was making a lot more money than I was making in architecture.
Yeah.
So after that, I decided, I might be interested in trying to pursue this. So I put together a portfolio, went around to ad agencies. I think my first year I saw 634 people.
634.
At ad agencies, and that started my career in photography. I was hired mostly to do architectural, but also sometimes landscape work.
Landscape in terms of just beauty of the landscape, or some commercial work?
Well, no, in terms of commercial work, but where there's something in the landscape or part of the landscape.
Basically, building with environment.
Correct. And I also, in that time, developed a fairly big stock photography business, both my own and also with a number of agencies. And so the pictures that I was taking, even pictures on vacation, I'd bring them back, give them to the stock agency, and they would sell. So for a long time, that was a very good source of income also.
So, as I understand, one of the most prominent buildings he was commissioned to photograph was actually World Trade Center during the production of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I was hired, the building was about half built. I was hired by the marketing firm, which was based in London, to photograph the building from different interesting angles that I could find. And because of my connections at that time in the real estate industry, I have access, I still do, to lots of places that other people would not be able to get to, places in the city and also around the city in Jersey and Queens and Brooklyn, where there were interesting viewpoints of the building. So that was sort of my job, was to find these places and take the photographs, and then the building was completed, CGI'd the remainder of the building in, and then it was used for the marketing purposes of the building.
That's great. So mostly it was exterior photos, so you also had an access to interior of it while it was in the process?
No, only exterior
And
photos.
all the exterior. Oh, this is very great. And as I understand, talking about Georgia, you, in the very beginning of your career, also had a very interesting project to photograph the millennial
Statue of
celebration
Liberty.
of Statue of Liberty.
Right, the
yes.
Centennial.
Oh,
That's okay.
my
Not,
bad.
not the millennial yet.
not that old lady, yes.
So, yes, I was hired as the official photographer for the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation, and 1986, so just really 2 or 3 years into my career.
Yeah.
And very prestigious job, and also a lot of fun. And I had access to the statue, again, that other people did not have. The scaffolding was around her at the time, so I was able to climb up on the scaffolding and get very close-up pictures of, individual parts, her face, her ears, her eyes, her nose, and that was a terrific job.
Well, this is indeed a rare opportunity. Did you turn a camera in the other direction and photograph Manhattan from there as well?
Probably not.
Well, it probably was too fascinated with this
Right.
opportunity.
Right. Right.
This is great. So, what would you say is the most complicated part of work of commercial architectural photographer?
In a way, for me, the most complicated part is to find the locations from which to shoot, at least in a situation like that, where somebody wants a building photographed. And also in Manhattan, it's difficult because the buildings are so close together.
Indeed.
So very often I'm working on these projects in the real estate industry before the building is up. And so then there are other things involved, but very often they want views from the building even though the building is not up. And in the old days, back a few years, I used to find buildings that were in the vicinity and
Naturally.
get up on those buildings. Now, since the use of drones has become a big thing, a lot of that photography is done by drones, and I don't like drones. And I don't do any drone work, although I have somebody who does, who I work with on occasion.
Oh, yeah. Drones are definitely the newest phenomenon in photography, and most of us are yet to try it, and I'm not even sure if it makes it better or worse.
Well, it's not something that I like to do because I'm very critical about, again, I always shoot on a tripod. I'm very critical about the way I frame things. When you're shooting with a drone,
There is no framing whatsoever.
well, there is some, but it's not easy. So,
Oh, basically, as I understand, the principle is what a lot of modern photographers are employing even without a drone. Just take as many pictures as you can and choose the best one.
that's true. And
But-
that's not the way I work.
But again, I'm personally photographing with manual focus, and I almost never use an automatic, and something like this for me just will take 90% of the whole process. If I can't turn this wheel exactly in the right position, the whole photo just doesn't make sense. Well, I don't know how it corresponds to your process. And speaking about the tripod, it's something you also mentioned before. You're always photographing from a tripod, even when you have enough light and it can be just.
Oh, no, absolutely. Just because the framing is so critical to me, and I just move the camera a little bit at a time, and a fraction of an inch here and there, and I just very often the exposures can be long exposures, especially if I'm doing interiors. So situation like that, you really need it. But that's the way I've always worked, and that's the way I prefer to work. I mean, I do shoots occasionally from a helicopter, and I wish I could use the tripod in the helicopter. It's one time that you can't.
Well, you can use it probably if you try really hard, but it wouldn't help you anyways because the vibration is still will be there. So
Right.
framing wouldn't work. And as I understand, your favorite lenses are Leicas. You mentioned that again at some point, right?
Well, I have the Leicas left over for my film cameras. I shot with Leicas, and now I shoot with Canon.
With Canon lenses.
And well, both Canon and Leica lenses, and I like them both.
Interesting. I mean, even though Canon is camera I always used, I never was too fond of the glass, except for a couple of glasses that actually considered to be the worst ones of
They're
those.
getting better.
I noticed that as well. Yes, they definitely improving.
No, they have some new fabulous lenses now. I mean, I'm shooting with their 5DSR, which is 51 megapixels, and really they didn't have any lenses that were sharp enough to deal with 51 megapixels when I first purchased the camera, and now they do. So
Progress. We are going into the future. So we will be back after this brief pause and continue conversation about the architecture.
good.
So we're back to a conversation about architecture in photography with Richard Berenholtz, and we was talking about commercially photographing new buildings, but recently you started a completely different series in completely different direction, actually photographing buildings that about to disappear from the face of the planet, the structures that are decaying and being put down by contractors. I've seen, I believe, some of those that was actually have destroyed. And instead of photographing them from commercial point of view, you're photographing them actually artistically and quite poetically, in my personal opinion.
Thank you.
So how this series started, and what is the underlying idea of it for you?
Well, I think this was something I was always interested in, but with the exception of a rare occasion, for some reason I was in the right place at the right time, I never really pursued it. And then I think in March of last year, I started, I had an idea about the project. I started off with a building in Brooklyn, and just really enjoyed doing it and enjoyed the result. You know, one of the other things about this is that most of my other work, in the 6 books that I have out on New York, I tended to want to shoot on beautiful days with blue skies, and this work I prefer to do on overcast days when the sun is not out or strong. But I started doing that and started trying to find buildings. It was difficult. There are a lot fewer of those buildings now than there used to be. Either they've been torn down or they've been renovated into something else, and when you do find the buildings, they are difficult to access. Sometimes there are fences around them. You can't even get close enough to do an exterior shot. Sometimes in order to do the exterior shots, you have to go places where you're really not supposed to be. Certainly the interior shots, very often you're not supposed to be in the buildings, but I do what I can do to get the pictures I'd like to get.
Absolutely. So what the series means to you personally? What do you see in the buildings that just 1 inch away from disappearing from our...
Well, sometimes maybe an inch, sometimes more, but it's amazing to me to go into these places that were once, vibrant working facilities, with people there and machines and everything humming along, and them in, perfect working order. And then something happened along the way. Somewhere, I think most of the buildings that I've done were probably abandoned anywhere from 20 to 60 years ago. And somewhere along the line, whatever was being produced there, if it was a factory, became obsolete, and it was just left to sit. And so I go in, and occasionally I even feel like maybe if I look over my shoulder, I'm going to see a ghost. There's a sense sometimes that there's a presence there of the past.
I'm pretty sure
and just the thoughts about what went on there and how it's changed and become something new. Very often the places have a lot of graffiti in them, so they've become a palette for a different kind of artist.
This is interesting. So the philosophy of change, nevertheless.
For sure.
Interesting. And as I understand, you started from New York City and then was expanding to the whole tri-state area, right?
Right. Again, they're very difficult to find. Go on the internet. That helps. Except that it's hard to know on the internet what's current, because they'll show a building, you don't really know when the photograph was done, and then it turns out the building is no longer there.
Wow, yeah,
But-
that happens all the time.
Right. But I started in New York, and then I started branching out to basically the tri-state area, Connecticut, New Jersey, out on Long Island. I think probably the furthest I've gone so far to shoot anything is maybe 100 miles from New York City.
Oh, I'm pretty sure there is plenty still to cover
Well, I think
within this radius.
Well, there's probably, I think you start heading out west, there's a lot.
Basically toward a spice of Route 66 to do
Exactly.
the process.
Right.
Yeah, it actually was one of my dreams to photograph one of those ghost towns that exist further to the west
Right.
on a route.
And probably fewer and fewer now.
I wouldn't say so. I mean, one of the things that happens with globalization, a lot of people moving from the small towns because they just prefer living in a big city, and naturally a lot of them just disappearing, especially if it's on the borderline of town and village. Pretty sure there will be more and more of those actually.
Oh, maybe.
Well, they're easier to decay than concrete structures that
True.
factories was.
True.
So
But it is interesting that you go into places that are built of concrete and steel, and you all of a sudden it's going away. You realize that if anything is left long enough, that nature is going to take over.
yeah, absolutely. I was actually always fascinated how it's happening that the buildings about the same age, if it's still being used and being maintained in one or other way, is in completely different shape than the concrete of the building that was just left to be standing alone.
No, absolutely. I mean, I go into these buildings and there are trees, big trees, growing inside the buildings. It becomes like a greenhouse,
In a
some
way,
of them.
yeah.
And, it's fascinating because all of a sudden the outside has come inside. And you could imagine everything just eventually going back to the earth.
For me, in decaying buildings, especially when you talk about industrial ones, the most philosophical part was actually the name of the company or the name of the owner on the front.
Right.
Carved into the stone, meaning to be there for centuries, and yet just good for nothing now and forgotten about by everybody. Yeah, I'm pretty... So, photographing those buildings, is more of the artistic pursuit.
It
It's
is.
more from an aesthetical point of view.
Yes.
And what are your plans with the results of this process? You planning to actually share it with anybody besides Facebook folks?
Yes, I'm hoping to have an exhibition or more. And I haven't really started pursuing that yet, but very soon. And we'll see what happens.
Well, since we're talking about exhibiting photo walks, what is your favorite media to exhibit a print? We never touched this subject yet with our guests, but it's one of the most important things about presenting your work to the world, how you give it physical form.
So I envision this particular subject matter. I would like the prints to be 5 or 6 feet big, because they get very compelling at that size.
Absolutely.
Especially the interior photos, when you're standing in front of that, you can start to feel that you're in the space. And also there's so much detail in the photographs, so many things going on, that even when I'm taking the photo, I don't necessarily see everything. You know, after I'm working on the image and I'm on the computer, all of a sudden I'll start seeing things that I didn't realize that were there.
Absolutely.
And again, to have very large prints, you know, would enable the viewers to be able to do that.
And what media would you say would be a good one to use? I mean, there are so many options right now, from acrylic, glass, metal, canvas, regular paper.
At the moment, I just view them as basic, you know, fine prints.
Paper.
Yep, paper.
Well, if I may try to give you an idea, one of the things that can be done is actually printing with the metal background, where white is replaced by light color silver.
No, I know about that.
I'll talk a little bit more about it after this quick break.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back. There are only a few minutes left, and we wanted to finish talking about the prints. And basically, what I was saying, that the vivid colors and the antiquated looks would probably really pop when the white background is replaced with the feel of new shiny metal. Just an idea.
Something to look into.
Yeah, and traditionally on the last part of our show, we're asking our guests to give some advice to our viewers in terms of what photographically they do the best. And you, one of the best architectural photographers in New York, and by far the best I've met personally. So the advice that definitely should be in this direction. And you mentioned before that you have a lot of information about how to find the right spot, and it's very important for you to find the right spot for your photo and how to get access to it. So would you care to share a little bit of this?
Well, I don't know if it's information as much as just something that I've learned through the years. And when I first started doing this and I was photographing New York, I realized that in order to get the best photos, and maybe the kind of photos that not everybody could get from the ground, certainly, that I had to get up in buildings to high places. And I looked around the city and looked at the buildings and said, I'd like to get up there. And it was not very, I started off asking permission, and then I discovered that it was better just to go.
Right.
And it wasn't so difficult. I would get in an elevator, I would get in a stair, I would go up to the top of a building, and more often than not, I was able to get access one way or another. After 9/11, that all changed.
Can't imagine.
Because it became very difficult. The security in buildings went, way up. So it became very difficult to access the buildings, and then you had to ask permission for sure. But besides that, most of my commercial work is in the real estate industry. I work on a lot of new buildings, all very tall buildings very often that are going up in the city. And so I have access to those buildings, and as the buildings are going up, I get to take photographs from the buildings, what the views are. Sometimes they're not compelling, sometimes they're great. I love the fact that there's a new perch in the sky that's never existed before, so I have the opportunity to take a view that's never ever been taken before. And with these connections, I've, get access to a lot of different places.
Sounds good. Well, there is a lot I would like to ask you. Maybe I would ask you to visit us again.
We'll do another show.
I'm looking forward to hear about this exhibition. You can definitely expect me to come and take a look.
Absolutely. We'll
Thank you very much,
there.
Richard.
Thank you.
It was really great.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.